guys and gals, you are watching Boomer TV at the Video Game Factory, and I'm Andy Asher. Now, quick backstory here. I founded Boomer 8 years ago on the premise that we should embrace aging, not fight against it. Now, I am happy to discover that premise is growing with leaps and bounds thanks to our amazing older community that we have grown an enormous web presence that is redefining what it means to have, fulfillment in life, as we get older. And what is so exciting today for me is discovering a scholar who has put it into eloquent words. He is Charles Garfield, PhD, and his book, Our Wisdom Years, Growing Older with Joy, Fulfillment, Resilience, and No Regrets. Now, we'll talk to Charles in just a moment, but let me just say, I hope we can bring some fun, some seriousness, some enlightenment to your life. This video backdrop here is part of the visual and auditory art form that is an emotional experience that hooked me 3 years ago. Thus, we are here in my playroom today with one of my favorites, Battle Royale here, which we will talk about in just a moment. And meantime, next week, just to let you know, we have a financial guy who is going to talk to us about retirement savings during COVID-19, and we'll speak to a former Wisconsin Governor, Tommy Thompson, who reveals his thoughts about how state governors have become the main characters in the new reality that we're living today. Now, I do have one request from you. If you like what we're doing here, you find us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter or your favorite social media. Today we are streaming live on Facebook and Twitter, Periscope, YouTube, and Twitch, a popular video site for video gamers. So, the point is, let's get started, all right? And remember, I love marmalade. Well, Charles Garfield, I am so excited that you have joined us today.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
I can't begin, though, without asking you how your life has changed for you in our period of COVID-19.
Well, one of the things that's happened is I get calls from all sorts of people, including people of a certain age, people in their late 50s and who are in their 60s, 70s, and 80s, asking me, how can they make the best use of this time? And instead of viewing it as a kind of forced imprisonment, view it as a retreat where you can reevaluate your life. You can take a look at the kinds of things you're most proud of, what you wish to pass on to the future. Do a reevaluation of your life. We finally have the time to do it.
Indeed we do, and that's a great thing to put our attention to. In describing who you are, Charles, there is literally so much to your amazing background, which to me is a story in itself. So, take us from what you have been doing in the highest levels of actually science and academia to your book, Our Wisdom Years.
Well, interestingly enough, when I hit 60, I started reevaluating the whole long arc of my life. I started out as a mathematician. I had the good fortune of working at Grumman Aerospace during the time of the Apollo 11 mission, when we landed our first 2 astronauts on the moon. And I realized I was more interested in people than I was in science. And I went back to school, got a doctorate in clinical psychology, and started studying people. When I hit my late 50s, I realized that something was changing. Something very dramatic was changing. When I hit 60 especially, I started hearing from my friends the same story, that they didn't feel the same. That rather than having their egos tell them what they should do, they were hearing their soul calling them, telling them what they should be. It was a move from ego to soul. And it was a wonderful kind of awareness that things were quite different. So I started studying older people in their 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and asking the question, what's different? What's changed for you? And I started hearing all sorts of things about people they loved and who loved them, and work that they were proud of. Those are the 2 things I heard the most.
And it's important that we can be that honest with ourselves, because in many cases it's hard to admit to the fact that maybe we want something more and we need to do it.
Well, it may be a challenge, but there's also an opportunity. Uh, we may be, if you're 60 years old, you may live another 40 years. The largest growing segment of the population are people over 100. So you may live another 40 years. What are you going to do at that time? It's not the same as adulthood. The reason I called the book Our Wisdom Years is that that's the new stage of life that we're in now, and it's different. The priorities are different than adulthood.
It really is. And why don't I, before I forget to ask you, you deserve to brag a little bit and boast of, if you will. Your book is looking good, isn't it?
Well, I've been getting all sorts of wonderful feedback from all different directions in this country and elsewhere, and Amazon picked the book as its number one new release in gerontology and social science. It's a number one new release in the aging category. So I'm delighted that people are responding to it so beautifully.
Well, it sounds as if you did your research and you found there is a certain change taking place or an awareness taking place that maybe previous generations didn't realize.
Well, they didn't realize it because we had a different life expectancy at that point. People worked until they were 65 and then they retired. That's what I grew up with. You retired at 65, you might live a few more years and then that was it. But now, because of better health practices, because of better medical assistance, and because of a different kind of attitude toward later life, we're living a lot longer. And as I said earlier, you could live, if you're 60, you could live 40 more years. And my question is, what will you do with your time?
Yeah, and that it makes me ask, why does some of the most profound growth of our lives happen after age 60?
Well, it's because the priorities have shifted. It's like I said earlier. So, what is your soul? Who is your soul calling you to be? It's different than climbing a ladder. It's different than getting ahead. The priorities are not success anymore. The priorities are fulfillment and building a life that has a legacy. What do you want to pass on to your children, your grandchildren, other people's children, the world at large? What is it that was most important to you? And you don't have to be some sort of special person to have a legacy. It doesn't have to be something grand and glorious. And in fact, it can be as simple as a legacy letter that you write to somebody, anybody, a grandchild or children or anyone you value, anyone close to you. And what do you want to pass on to them? And write it in the form of a legacy letter. It's a beautiful document to pass on. Or what we're seeing now is that people are doing videos of themselves passing on their legacy. And they leave behind videos to their loved ones.
So your point being is that by putting together that legacy letter or the video, it partly gives you the drive and the motivation to maybe live those dreams. Is that correct?
You can live those dreams yourself, but you can pass on the best wisdom you have to other people who you value. That becomes your task. That becomes what you do. You translate your life into those lessons that are most important to you and then pass them on. It can be a very heartwarming kind of experience.
Yes, and let me just go back a little bit because I always find it interesting, people in the sciences and in your case in mathematics, going into some of the softer studies, and I think it's an interesting combination to bring the hard reality of math into putting that into things that are a little bit harder to quantify, and maybe you can bring all of that together. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, sure. Mathematics taught me to think clearly. It taught me about rigor, about being definite about things, as definite as one can be. And when I got into psychology, I realized I could use that sense of rigor, that desire to get things right, to analyze human beings, and particularly people in later life. I've been fascinated by what the prospects are and the possibilities are when people hit their wisdom years. It really is so much different than the popular misconceptions about it. The popular misconceptions about later life are that it's either about decline and debilitation, you get old and you wear out, or people resist it and deny it and say, I'm as good as I ever was. Well, anybody who's 65 or 70 will tell you that they're not physically the same as they were when they were 25 or 30. But it's neither decline or debilitation nor being as good as you ever were.
You don't have to be.
You don't, that's exactly right. You don't have to. The whole prospect is that it's about fulfillment. It's about soul replacing success as the primary value.
And that can be any number of things, and you pretty much define what you want it to be for yourself. And how can we find, our meaningful sense of direction in later years? Is there a process to go about that?
Yeah, you just what I suggest is you look at a time in your past in which you did something that was most fulfilling for you, or something that you wished you could have done, something that's incomplete in your life, and see if you can fulfill it now. I'll give you an example. My parents met in an acting class after high school. My father always wanted to be an actor more than anything else, but it was the Depression and acting was not a good choice for a career. So he went into sales, and for 40 plus years, he was a salesman. Within weeks of his retirement from the sales career, he went back into acting, joined an acting troupe, became the leading man in a series of plays, and he fulfilled his dream of in his early life, the dream of his earlier years, in finding a situation that really worked for him beautifully. We all can do that. Something that we wished we could have done, we might have done, something that might have been interesting, but we couldn't possibly do it at the time. Take a look now and see if you can fulfill it now. Project out 5 years from now and ask yourself, how would you like to live this intervening 5 years? What would be most fulfilling to you? And actually map out a work experience and a life experience that would be ideal for you. Do thinking about this that we tend not to do when we're climbing a ladder and trying to be a success.
Yeah, and there's also the argument that we have within ourselves is, do I want to put myself out there again and experience the stresses that maybe I've left behind? Or do I want to live with that and do something and go for something that I believe in? You still have to come to terms with your own mind about that.
You do, and what I would suggest is that we may not ever think of joy being a fundamental ingredient in our lives. We don't think of it often enough because we're running and we're compiling to-do lists and filling up our calendar and staying busy. But in later life, one of the things I heard from older folks is that they started thinking about what brought them the greatest joy. You see grandparents and grandchildren, for instance, and you see joy. You see people with their pets and you see joy. You see people writing and reading and doing all sorts of things like artistic hobbies and other things that bring them joy. And we're finally in a stage of our life in later years where we're able to move into joy as a central value.
So, I definitely can feel that. And sometimes joy has to come after a lot of work, but joy can be the end result.
It can be the end result, and sometimes it's a lot of work, and sometimes it's more like a hobby that becomes something central. Many of the older folks I talked about started experimenting and exploring with things. There was a wonderful man who I met who decided he had a very successful career in investment banking, made a lot of money. But when he retired, he wanted to make something with his hands. So he started designing old Americana furniture. And he got so good at it that he developed a website, started selling his creations. He didn't pressure himself to be a success. He didn't need to be a success financially. He just enjoyed the act of creating these wonderful furniture pieces. And that brought him joy in his life. What brings you joy is my question.
Yeah, I think that's a great question to ask yourself. And, it makes me wonder, too, why is our model of what it means to grow older really incomplete?
Well, it's incomplete, as I said earlier, because we only have two models of old age, and both of them don't work. One is the decline and debilitation model. You get older and you wear out. The other is a denial of aging. I'm as good as I ever was. And nothing's any different. Well, that's clearly not true either. We're in a time when fulfillment and higher values become central. That's why I called the book Our Wisdom Years. I wanted people to understand just how important wisdom was in later life.
Well, how can we retrieve forgotten or neglected parts of ourselves?
Well, you go back to a time in your past and you ask the question, when did I feel most fulfilled? When did I experience my life as the most fulfilling it ever was? And I mentioned my father's experience as an actor. Well, my mother had the same experience. She retired. She was a school teacher and a good one, an elementary school teacher, but she always wanted to get a doctorate. She wanted to have a doctorate. So when she retired, my parents moved from New York to California. My mother went straight to the UC, University of California at Berkeley campus, and started auditing classes. She would just drop in on classes. And she outlined a PhD curriculum for herself, not a real one, not one that had exams and papers and all sorts of things, but just the classes that she wanted to take. And 2 years later, 3 years later, I think it was, she fulfilled every one of those personal requirements. She sat in on all those classes. And I remember asking her, doesn't anybody mind that you're just sort of showing up and sitting down and taking in the class? She said, nobody throws out a little old lady. And she had one of the most gratifying experiences of her life.
Boy, your parents are fantastic role models, aren't they?
They really are. And they taught me a lot. They were the first two older people I really studied.
Yeah, yeah. Well, great to hear. Can you talk a little bit about your book? I know it's available on Amazon. Our Wisdom Years: Growing Older with Joy, Fulfillment, Resilience, and No Regrets.
Well, the book is based on 9 different tasks. I mentioned a few of them already. Legacy is one of them. Retrieving forgotten parts of yourself and turning it into a life mission. Uh, how can we create the world without uh, instances in which we're regretting all sorts of things and need to forgive ourselves? What are we most proud of? What legacy are we most proud of? Uh, all sorts of things. What is our relationship with the eternal? One of the questions I was most fascinated by was I asked people, now that you've entered your wisdom years, how has your relationship to God, or whatever you call it, greater entity, the greater being, how has that relationship to God changed, if at all? If so, what is it? I asked people, what would you forgive and why? Or what are you most grateful for and why? The book is based on these kinds of questions.
And I want to make sure that we talk about the Shanti Project too.
Yeah, there's my legacy right there.
Ah, all right. Okay. Tell us about that.
46 years ago, almost 46 years ago, I started a volunteer program in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area. And I trained volunteers to take care of, at the time, to take care of cancer patients, to provide emotional support, to provide practical support. And it turned out to be a very successful project. But when the AIDS epidemic hit, we were the first organization of a volunteer nature in the country to take care of people with this new disease, AIDS. And we took care of people with cancer and AIDS for years and years and years. Now, look what's happening. We have a new plague on our hands, a new pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. And Shanti Project has just started a new program where we care for people who have COVID-19 and provide them with the kind of support they need to get through this experience. So the Shanti has actually spawned over 600 other projects around the world modeled after it.
And you also have a website, right?
Yes, my website is Charles Garfield, one word, my name, charlesgarfield.com.
Okay. Well, we have it's picture of it and your lovely face on there. And I want to just give a quick update on my Battle Royale game. Well, the first one I ended up being a spectator because, I get focused on putting all this together. The game gets started, I lose touch of what's happening, and before I know it, I'm out of there. I'm eliminated. But this time I got in on time, so I'll be playing this after Charles and I say goodbye. But that's the update on Battle Royale, and it's just one of my favorites. It has some amazing graphics, a fun story to tell, and you know what? When you have a couple of games under your belt for the last hour, it makes you feel great. It really does. And something, if you like it, try it. But anyway, that's an update on that. Charles, is for anyone who wants to maybe get started on this, they can certainly pick up your book. Anything else?
Well, I would just suggest that anybody who wanted to get started, pick up the book. It's filled with exercises that you can do that are easy to do, but very powerful. And I'll give you an example. Anybody who is paying attention right now should ask themselves, what are you most grateful for in your life? List the 2 or 3 things you're most grateful for. And if it has to do with another person, make sure that they know. And then secondly, what do you regret most in your life? And if it's something that you might have done that hurt another person, write a forgiveness letter. Even if you don't mail it, even if you don't send it to them, write a forgiveness letter and let them know that you did the best you could, given who you were at the time and what you knew at the time. And if it was now, you would have done it differently, and you're very sorry, and you learned lessons from the situation so that you'll never do it again. Gratitude and forgiveness, I heard from older people frequently.
Beautiful. Charles, again, thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me. I liked it a lot. It was a wonderful interview.
Yeah, it's Charles Garfield, PhD, and the book, Our Wisdom Years, Growing Older with Joy, Fulfillment, Resilience, and with No Regrets. If you like what we're doing, find us on Facebook. Also, you can find us over on bloomerboomer.com actually. And you can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, all your favorite social media. And we'll see you next time. And in the meantime, I love marmalade. All right, that looks good. Let me just shut it down here.